Emily had always believed that being a wife meant nodding, smiling, and saying yes to whatever her husband, Jason, wanted. She wasn't malicious or cruel. She just thought life was easier that way. She rolled out of bed at 10 a.m., sipping her oversized mug of coffee while Jason, already dressed for work, kissed her cheek softly and reminded her about the bills, the laundry, and the groceries. Emily nodded, muttered a lazy "I'll do it later," and returned to her scrolling on Instagram. It wasn't like Jason didn't notice. He did. Every single time she ignored a task, he quietly made a mental note. But he loved her. And he always hoped that Emily would wake up to the reality that marriage required more than half-hearted attention. The apartment they shared in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood was cozy, modern, but it had slowly become a reflection of Emily herself, slightly messy, unkempt, and surprisingly empty of warmth. Jason's work hours were long, his patience was tested daily, but he never voiced his frustration loudly. Instead, he tried subtle gestures: a folded towel, a neatly stacked plate, a reminder about dinner, but Emily took them for granted, thinking he'd always pick up the slack. One Friday evening, as the city hummed outside their window and the orange sunset spilled over the skyline, Jason came home a little earlier than usual. Emily was sprawled on the couch, half watching a reality TV show and scrolling her phone, while the kitchen looked like a tornado had hit it. Dirty dishes, spilled cereal, a half-eaten sandwich, chaos that Emily didn't even notice. Hey, Jason said, leaning against the doorframe, his voice calm but carrying an edge she rarely heard. Emily barely looked up. Hey, babe, you're home early. He stepped fully into the apartment, surveying the mess. For the first time in a long while, his lips didn't twitch into a smile. He crossed his arms and took a deep breath. Emily, we need to talk, she groaned, setting her phone down. About what? Can't it wait until tomorrow? No, he said firmly. It can't. I can't keep living like this, like I'm married to a roommate, not a partner. You need to understand that being a wife is more than just showing up. It's effort. It's respect. It's commitment. Emily tilted her head, a lazy smirk playing on her lips. Wow, dramatic. Did something happen at work today, or are you just stressed? Jason's calm demeanor hardened. No, Emily, I've been patient. I've been kind. I've reminded you, quietly, over and over, that we both have to contribute to this marriage. But nothing's changed. You don't care to try, and I can't. I can't keep doing this alone, her smirk faltered. Doing what alone? Being married, he said. I love you, Emily, but love isn't enough if one person stops trying. I'm leaving. For a while. I need space to think, to breathe. And maybe for you to realize what marriage really is. Emily blinked, stunned. Her chest tightened in a way she hadn't felt in years. You're... What, leaving? Like moving out? Yes, he said simply. For now. It's not permanent, but I need this. And I hope it will make you see that effort matters. She laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. But when she looked into his eyes, she realized the joke wasn't there. The steady, unwavering gaze, the quiet determination. Jason meant every word. That night, Emily sat alone in the apartment. The TV flickering, the dishes still piled up, and a sense of panic she hadn't expected began to settle in. For the first time, she realized she didn't know what her life would look like without Jason there, without his care, without the quiet love that had been her safety net for so long. But panic alone wasn't going to change anything. She knew that. Deep down, Emily had to choose, continue living lazily in her comfort, or wake up and fight for the love she'd been taking for granted. And that was the night her world quietly, irrevocably, began to shift. Asterisk, the apartment felt emptier than ever. Emily stared at the cold, untouched dinner on the counter. The clinking of dishes in the sink echoing like a haunting reminder of what she had ignored for months. Jason's scent was gone, no aftershave, no faint trace of him brushing past her on the way to work. The silence was deafening, and for the first time, Emily felt it press down on her chest. She sank onto the couch, scrolling her phone mindlessly, but nothing distracted her anymore. Every notification, every silly video felt hollow. Her thumb hovered over the screen as guilt began to creep in, crawling up her spine like ice. She thought back to the little moments she had brushed off, Jason asking her to help with bills, reminding her of chores, even inviting her for a simple walk around the neighborhood. She had always said, later, I'm tired. I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow never came. The truth hit her harder than she expected. Jason's patience had limits. She had assumed love could cover laziness, that affection would make up for neglect. But it didn't, and now she realized she was alone in a way that hurt deeply. Painfully. Emily wandered the apartment like a ghost, touching things Jason had left behind: his mug, a folded sweater, a stack of papers he had organized meticulously. Memories of small arguments, small gestures of love, all mingled into a bitter concoction of regret. She had taken every ounce of effort he had offered for granted, never realizing how much it meant. The night stretched on. Emily found herself at the kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper in front of her, trying to make sense of her own thoughts. She scribbled random sentences. I can't believe I took him for granted. I need to change, but how? None of it made complete sense, but writing felt like the first step. As the days passed, Emily began noticing details she had overlooked, the neighbor's couple smiling as they shared chores, a friend casually complimenting her husband's patience, even the small efficiency Jason had in everything he touched. She saw that marriage wasn't just a label. It was a partnership, a constant act of love and effort. Emily's mornings, once lazy and slow, became moments of reflection. She started making her own bed, doing the dishes she had ignored, even preparing a small breakfast not for Jason because he wasn't there but for herself. It was strange, this feeling of responsibility, but it was also oddly liberating. She realized she had been hiding behind her laziness, thinking that love meant comfort, when in reality, love demanded courage, patience, and action. One rainy afternoon, Emily found herself standing in front of their bedroom mirror, staring at the reflection she had avoided for so long. She barely recognized herself, disheveled, guilty, uncertain. But underneath the fatigue, she found something flickering, a spark of determination. I can do better. I must do better. Emily began to make lists, things she could improve, ways she could show care, small gestures she had overlooked. She started cooking simple meals, cleaning with intention, even writing notes to herself to remember what Jason had once told her. Every effort felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had forgotten existed. But no change felt complete without facing the hardest part, her heart. Emily had taken Jason's love for granted, and that thought alone was almost unbearable. She realized that if she wanted to save their marriage, she couldn't just change her actions, she had to change her mindset, her approach, her attitude toward love and commitment. Late one evening, as the rain pattered against the windows and the city outside glistened under streetlights, Emily sat alone, holding a photo of them from happier times. Jason's smile in that picture, warm and full of life, reminded her of why she had fallen in love in the first place. She whispered to herself, I won't lose this. I won't let my laziness ruin us. I'll fight. I'll fight for him, for us, for me. And for the first time in months, Emily felt the fire inside her rekindling, not anger, not fear, but determination. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Change never is. But she also knew one thing with absolute clarity: love dies when one partner stops trying. And she wasn't ready to let theirs die, not now. Not ever. Emily woke up to sunlight spilling through the blinds, illuminating the quiet apartment that suddenly felt like a new world. Jason's absence had left a void, yes, but it had also given her clarity. She had spent weeks reflecting, planning, and slowly discovering parts of herself she had long ignored. Now, it was time to take action, to move from guilt to growth. She started with the simplest things: making the bed neatly, doing laundry without reminders, even organizing the kitchen cabinets that had been in chaos for months. At first, it felt mechanical, almost like following a checklist. But gradually, Emily began noticing a sense of pride in these small victories. For the first time, she realized that caring for a home wasn't a burden, it was a form of love. And it could be empowering. Cooking was a battlefield at first. She had never really paid attention to meals. Takeout and frozen dinners had been her go-to. But now, she pulled out recipe books, watched cooking videos, and experimented in the kitchen. Eggs, pasta, salads, simple dishes, but every plate she prepared was a small step toward proving to herself that she could be responsible, creative, and caring. The aroma of food filled the apartment, and for the first time in months, Emily felt a spark of accomplishment. Her phone buzzed occasionally with messages from friends. Hey, haven't seen Jason in a while. One text read, everything okay? Emily hesitated, then typed back, I'm learning and growing. There was honesty in her words she hadn't realized she was capable of. She was no longer hiding behind excuses or laziness. But change wasn't easy. Some days were harder than others. She struggled with fatigue, old habits that tempted her to sink back into comfort, and guilt that sometimes felt heavier than the apartment itself. On one particularly difficult evening, she stood in front of the fridge, staring at a half-empty bottle of wine, thinking, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Then she remembered Jason's words, love dies when one partner stops trying. She shook her head, pushing the doubt aside. No, she would not fail, not at this, not at herself. Emily poured herself a cup of tea instead, sat at the kitchen table, and made a list of tasks for the next day. Cleaning, cooking, even a plan to start exercising again. Every item ticked off would be a tiny proof that she was reclaiming control, reclaiming love, reclaiming herself. Emily also started exploring the emotional side of growth. She wrote letters not to Jason, not yet, but to herself. She acknowledged her mistakes, her laziness, her neglect, and most importantly, she promised to do better. I am capable. I am worthy. I can be the partner I want to be, she wrote repeatedly until the words began to feel true. Not just hopeful. Outside, Chicago moved on, oblivious to her transformation. The city hummed with life, children laughing in the park, street vendors calling out, cars rushing through the streets, but inside the apartment, Emily was building a life from scratch. And unlike before, she wasn't doing it to impress anyone, she was doing it to respect herself, to honor the love she had been taking for granted. The hardest part was resisting the urge to text Jason, to seek comfort in his presence. But she didn't. She knew she had to walk this path alone, to face her own shortcomings without leaning on him as a safety net. Every small victory, cooking a perfect breakfast, finishing laundry without reminders, writing a heartfelt reflection, felt like a brick in rebuilding the foundation of their marriage. One evening, after preparing a simple dinner for herself, Emily sat at the table, savoring the food and the quiet triumph of effort. She realized something profound. Love wasn't passive. It wasn't something you could just assume would remain. It was active, living, and required constant nurturing. She had taken that for granted, and now, through absence and effort, she was beginning to understand it. She glanced at the empty chair across from her. Jason wasn't there yet, but she felt his presence in a new way, not as a partner covering for her laziness, but as someone whose love deserved to be earned every day. And for the first time, Emily felt ready to do the work. To fight for love, to fight for respect, and to fight for the life she wanted, not just as a wife, but as a complete, responsible, and self-aware woman. Emily had begun to change. But the journey was far from over. She knew that the coming days would test her resolve, force her to confront old habits, and challenge her emotionally in ways she hadn't imagined. But for the first time, she felt capable of facing them and capable of showing Jason, when the time came, that she had truly learned what it meant to love and to be loved. Weeks passed, and Emily's apartment transformed alongside her mindset. The clutter that once mirrored her laziness was replaced with a home that felt alive. Every corner told a story of effort: laundry folded, dishes washed, kitchen counters wiped down, little notes of encouragement for herself pinned to the fridge. But Emily knew this was only the beginning. Life, she realized, wasn't going to wait for her to catch up. Work obligations piled up, bills needed attention, and her own stubborn habits tried to sneak back in. One morning, she woke up late, groaning as she realized she had forgotten to set the coffee maker. Instead of cursing herself, she paused, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that perfection wasn't the goal, consistency was. She brewed coffee, made a simple breakfast, and tackled the day with the quiet determination she had been cultivating. Emily also had to confront habits she had ignored for years: avoiding difficult conversations, brushing off responsibilities, and relying on Jason's patience as a crutch. She started making lists, not just for household tasks, but for personal growth, journaling every night, setting reminders for deadlines, checking in with friends and family. Slowly, her confidence grew. She realized that effort didn't just benefit her marriage, it was reshaping her entire life. But the emotional challenge was the hardest. There were evenings when she sat alone, staring at the empty living room, imagining Jason walking through the door. Her heart would ache, and tears would prick her eyes. She wanted to call him, to tell him she was changing, but she resisted. Growth required patience, and she had to prove it to herself first before expecting it to be recognized. One particularly stormy evening, a minor crisis tested her resolve. The water heater broke, flooding the bathroom slightly, and Emily felt panic rise. In the past, she would have ignored it, called Jason to fix it, or waited for someone else to handle it. But now, she took a deep breath, researched how to turn off the main valve, and called a local plumber herself. By the time the water stopped, she was soaked and exhausted but proud. She realized that responsibility didn't just mean completing chores. It meant facing unexpected challenges head-on. In her heart, Emily knew that Jason's temporary absence was a gift in disguise. He had forced her to confront her shortcomings, to develop self-respect, and to learn that love required action. Each day, she felt a little stronger, a little more capable, a little more ready to face him, not as the careless wife she had been, but as a partner he could rely on. Her friends noticed the change too. "Emily, you're glowing," one of them remarked over coffee. "What's happening? You seem different." Emily smiled, realizing that the transformation wasn't just internal, it was visible to the world. She had begun to embody the effort, responsibility, and commitment she had long avoided, and yet, a part of her still feared Jason's reaction. Would he notice? Would he believe she had truly changed? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but it also motivated her to keep pushing forward. Every dish washed, every chore completed, Every thoughtful action became a silent letter to Jason. I am learning. I am changing. I am worthy of your love. One evening, after finishing a homemade dinner, a modest but carefully prepared meal, Emily set the table, lit a candle, and sat alone, imagining Jason across from her. She whispered softly, I hope you can see this, even from afar. I hope you notice how hard I'm trying. The rain tapped against the window, the city hummed outside. And inside the apartment, Emily felt a quiet but profound satisfaction. She was no longer waiting for change to happen. She was creating it herself. And she knew that when Jason returned, she would be ready not just to reconcile, but to truly build a marriage grounded in respect, effort, and love. Emily's journey wasn't complete, but she had crossed a critical threshold. Laziness and carelessness had been replaced with accountability, awareness, and courage. And with each passing day, the woman she was becoming felt more real, more capable, and more deserving of the love she had once taken for granted. The morning Jason returned was quiet, almost surreal. Emily had spent the previous evening double-checking the apartment, straightening every cushion, polishing the counters, and preparing breakfast just in case. She wanted everything to reflect her effort, her commitment, her readiness. But deep down, she knew that no physical perfection could truly convey the changes she had undergone inside. When she heard the sound of the key turning in the lock, her heart skipped a beat. The door opened and Jason stepped inside, his eyes scanning the apartment. Emily felt a rush of emotion, nervousness, hope, fear, all tangled together. Hey, Jason said softly, a faint smile touching his lips. Emily held her breath. Hey, she replied, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed her. She led him into the living room, her hands trembling slightly. Every corner he looked at reflected her efforts, the neat couch, the clean kitchen, the small notes of encouragement she had pinned for herself. Jason paused, his eyes landing on the table set for breakfast. Wow, he murmured. It wasn't just the food though. He appreciated the effort, but the energy, the care, the intention behind everything. He took a step closer, studying her face. Emily, you've changed. Emily's throat tightened. I've been trying, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've realized how much I've taken for granted, how careless I've been. I want to be better. For us, for me, for you. Jason nodded slowly, a mix of relief and caution in his expression. It's not easy to admit that, and it's not easy to change. But I can see it in you. I can feel it. They sat together at the table, sharing breakfast. But the real meal was the conversation that followed. Emily told him about the struggles, the mistakes she had confronted, the little victories she had claimed for herself. She explained how she had learned to take responsibility, not just for the home but for the marriage itself, for the love that required active participation every single day. Jason listened silently, occasionally nodding, occasionally smiling. I wanted you to see what it felt like when I'm not here, not as punishment, but as clarity, he said gently. And I think you got it. Emily reached for his hand, trembling. I did, I really did. And I don't want to ever go back to that careless, lazy person I was. I want to keep growing, keep trying, keep loving. The morning stretched into afternoon, the city outside moving at its usual relentless pace. But inside, time seemed to slow. Emily felt a lightness she hadn't known in years, pride, love, hope, all intertwining. She realized that Jason's absence, though painful, had been the catalyst she desperately needed. It had forced her to confront herself, her weaknesses, and her potential. As the days passed after his return, Emily continued her efforts not to prove herself constantly, but because it had become a part of who she was. She cooked, cleaned, planned, and nurtured not out of obligation, but out of genuine care and respect. Jason noticed every detail, but more importantly, he noticed her attitude, her consistency, her renewed commitment. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights twinkle across the Chicago skyline, Jason turned to her. Emily, I'm proud of you, he said quietly. All of this, it shows me that love can survive, but only if both of us are willing to fight for it. You fought for it. You fought for us. Tears pricked Emily's eyes. But they weren't tears of guilt or fear, they were tears of relief, love, and recognition. She had learned the hardest lesson, that love is fragile when one partner stops trying, and powerful when both commit fully. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm not perfect and I'll never stop learning. But I promise, I'll never take us for granted again. Jason kissed her forehead, holding her close. And I'll never stop trying either. That's the deal, Emily. That's marriage. For the first time in years, Emily felt truly seen, truly respected, and truly loved, not for the person she had been, but for the person she had worked to become. And in that moment, she understood that effort, honesty, and commitment weren't burdens, they were the foundation of real love. The kind that survives absence, struggle, and life itself. The days turned into weeks. and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Emily and Jason had returned to their shared home, but things were no longer the same. They were better. The apartment was clean, organized, and full of warmth, but more importantly, the emotional space between them was alive again. Communication flowed freely, laughter returned to the corners that had been quiet for months, and every shared moment carried intention, not assumption. Emily had discovered something vital about herself. Love wasn't passive. It required presence, effort, and sincerity. She no longer waited for Jason to remind her of responsibilities, or for him to take charge of the household. She was active, engaged, and aware. Each day was a conscious decision to honor their relationship, and with that awareness came fulfillment, respect, and a renewed sense of identity. Jason noticed every change not as a critic, but as a partner who had watched her grow. He saw Emily preparing breakfast without being asked, leaving thoughtful notes, and taking care of herself and their home. He also noticed the small, almost imperceptible shifts in her attitude, the confidence in her voice, the patience in her gestures, the self-respect that now guided her actions. One evening, they sat on the balcony together, holding mugs of tea and watching the city lights dance across the skyline. Emily spoke softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. Jason, I know I can't undo the past, and I won't pretend I've been perfect. But I want you to know, I see what it means to be a partner now. I respect you, I respect myself, and I want to keep building this life with you together. Jason smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Emily, that's all I ever wanted. Not perfection, not someone who just said yes. I wanted someone who cared, someone willing to try, someone who knew that love isn't easy. And you've shown me that. You've fought for us, and that means more than words can say. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the city, feeling the quiet intimacy of shared effort and mutual respect. Emily realized that marriage was not a contract or a label. It was an ongoing journey. It required self-awareness, responsibility, and above all, a willingness to grow alongside your partner. In the weeks that followed, Emily continued to embrace her new life. She cooked, cleaned, organized, and nurtured not out of obligation, but because she understood the value of her actions. Jason, too, adjusted his approach not as a caretaker of her mistakes, but as an equal partner in a shared life. Together, they rebuilt the foundation of their marriage, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Emily had learned a lesson she would carry forever. Love dies when one partner stops trying. But love flourishes, grows, and deepens when both partners commit fully to the relationship, to each other and to themselves. She no longer took Jason for granted, and she no longer allowed laziness or carelessness to define her. One Sunday morning, as they sat together over pancakes and laughter filled the apartment, Emily looked at Jason and felt a sense of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. I thought love was easy, she admitted. I thought being a wife was just about saying yes. But now I know it's about showing up every single day with effort and intention. Jason reached across the table, holding her hand. Exactly. And the amazing thing is, you've become the wife I always knew you could be, and in the process, you've become the woman you were meant to be. Emily smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond the simple comforts of home or routine. It was the warmth of accomplishment, love, and mutual respect. She had changed, Jason had changed, and together they had rediscovered a love that was real, active, and unbreakable. As they leaned into each other, the city bustling quietly outside, Emily understood that this was just the beginning. Marriage, like life, was a journey, not a destination. But now she was ready to continue growing, learning, and loving, not perfectly, but authentically, intentionally, and wholeheartedly. And in that realization, Emily found peace, fulfillment, and a love that would endure any test, any challenge, and any storm.